So let me present now the correction of the last assignment that I gave you in the module 1. So here is the GAMS file for the correction of the partial equilibrium model with the introductions of value chain. So I'm starting with the model itself. So the model itself is here. So you see that there are now 8 blocks of equation, but you remember that the set R is defined on 16 countries or regions. So you've got 6 blocks of equation defined on R. So you will have 6 times 16, that is to say 96 equation, and you've got 2 other equations which are the equilibrium on the world market. So you will have 98 equations and 98 variables. So in fact there is supply and demand in the soy sector for each country. You've got supply and demand for meat for each country. You've got a price linkage in the soy sector for each country, a price linkage between local price and world price for each country in the meat sector, and then you've got the equilibrium on the world market of soy, and then the equilibrium condition on the world market of meat. So in fact the only difference is in the specifications of the demand for soy, which depends here on activity in the meat sector, okay, positively. And also you've got the supply function of meat, which depends not only on the price of meat, local price of meat, according to an increasing relation, but also the price of the input, which is soy, according to a decreasing relation. So in fact the program is not very different from the previous one. So we start with the declaration of a set of 16 countries or regions. We define a subset which consists in all elements of R except the rest of the world. Declarations of parameters, so it's a little bit more complicated because now we got 2 sectors. So for example we have size parameters not only for the soy sector but also for the meat sector. And same thing for import duty and export taxes. Elasticity, there are more elasticities because you have not only elasticities for supply and demand in soy and in meat sectors, but also you have cross elasticities. For example, elasticity of local demand of soy with respect to supply of meat, and elasticity of local supply of meat with respect to local price of soy, which is not usual elasticities. So the entry of data is as usual. The entry of elasticities is as usual. The calibration is exactly the same structure as in the previous program, because it's just more complicated. It is longer because you've got 2 sectors. So for example you have calibrations of size parameters not only for demand and supply in the soy sector but also demand and supply in the meat sector, but you have exactly the same structure. Declarations of variables, initializations of variables, declaration of equation, the model, then the definitions of the model, which is called soy livestock, which consists in all equations which are within this file. The first solve is just to check that the initial infeasibility is 0 or close to 0. Take notice that we use CNS because it's a square system. And now the shock. So the shock, you remember that I asked you to study the liberalizations in the soy sector, then the liberalizations in the meat sector, then liberalizations in both sectors. Well, in fact, here I show you only the liberalization in both sectors. So you've got an eliminations of import duty and export taxes in the soy sector, and import duty and export taxes in the meat sector. So you see that, in fact, we do not put all these taxes at zero, then ask for a solve. In fact, we ask for an elimination of import duty in the soy sector, then we ask for a solve, and so on. Why? Because, in fact, to have only one solve, which will include all these shocks, it will be complicated for the solver to obtain a solution. So what we do is that we cut the shock in several parts, and you see that, in fact, the shock coming from the eliminations of import duty in the meat sector is a big shock, and so we cut it in two. So here you see that we first divide by 2 import duty in the meat sector, then we ask for a solve, and then we have complete eliminations of import duty in the meat sector, and we ask for a second solve. So it means that to be sure that there is the right process concerning the shock, the solve of all this shock, we have to cut this shock in 5 shocks in order to be sure that the shock is fully passed. So after that, you've got calculations of parameters for soy sector and for the meat sector. So what I'm going to do is just to show you the complete liberalizations in both sectors. So you see that in the process window, we've got, in fact, a first solve without shock, so initial infeasibility is 0 or very close to 0, and then you have many shocks, 5, with a solution which is found out by the solver in 12 iteration here, then 13 iteration, and so on. So in fact you've got feasible solution to a square system for the 5 shocks, so you can see the results. So I can show you the results. So here you've got the rate of growth of local consumption of soy in percentage, then the rate of growth of local production of soy in percentage, then the rate of growth of the local price of soy in percentage, then the rate of growth of whole price of soy in percentage, and then the same thing for the meat sector. So if you want to make a good economic analysis of this, it's good to have, in fact, it's good to understand the impact of each component of the shock. So what you can do is, for example, to neutralize, to deactivate all this shock in order to have only one component of the total shock, which is an elimination of import duty in the soy sector. And I recommend that you do that first, and then you eliminate export taxes in the soy sector, then import duty in the meat sector, then export taxes in the meat sector. because it's the best solution to understand clearly the implications of the total shock. So, for example, here we eliminate import duty in the soy sector. So we've got the results, which are here. So it's an elimination of import duty in the soy sector. So it means that the imports will increase by each country. Okay, so it means that the world price of soy will increase. It will increase by more than 5%. And so with that, you can understand the variations of local price of soy in each country. So for example, for countries where there was no import duty like USA or Ukraine or Argentina, Paraguay and Bolivia, you've got variations of local price which is exactly equal to the variations of the world price. For other countries, of course, on one side you've got an increase in the world price, but on the other side you've got an elimination of import duty. So for example, in China, the second effect is larger, and so there is a decrease in the local price of soy. With that, you can understand that, in fact, you've got variations in local consumption of soy and local production of soy. So, for example, concerning China, you have a large decrease of the local price of soy. So you've got a big increase in the local consumptions of soy and a decrease in the productions of soy. And you remember that, in fact, you've got the production of meat, which depends on the price of meat, but also on the price of the input, which is the price of soy. So with that, you can in fact understand the impact of this shock on the local productions of meat. And with that, you can have also an understanding of the evolutions of the local price of meat and all other variables.